Hello, I'm Charles Speer, and I'm a teacher here at the Sunset International Bible Institute and former missionary to New Zealand. And I want to talk to you about New Zealand and the possibility that maybe you'll be a missionary there someday. Little did I realize when I married my sweetheart in January of 1977 that it would be another 9 years before she and our two small children would end up on the soil of New Zealand. And it was one of the most thrilling and exciting parts of the spiritual journey of myself and my wife, and also of our children. So I want to talk to you about that nation and some of the things that are special about it. I'm going to qualify it with certain words that I think will give you a good picture of it. The first word is small. You can see the map here. It's about 1,100 miles long, and it's about 280 miles wide at its widest point. So it's very small compared to the United States. As you look at it, they still have a voice in the world, though, even though they're small. They are the America's Cup champion, the yachting champion. They are often the rugby champion, although they're not at this point in time. I know that irks them. They're small. As you can see down in the lower right-hand corner of this world map, there they are. They're small. And, you think, well, maybe they should change the map around. And so they do. Australia and New Zealand flip the map, and they say, this is the way we ought to view the world map. And you might say, well, they've got small man mentality. They're just trying to prove themselves. But really, they're very content in their own KIWI skin. They know who they are, and they're very content to be that. 4.5 million people, and 1.5 million of those living in the big city of Auckland. A second word I might use is isolated. Well, not really, but in some ways they are. Even though these distances are in kilometers, if you just multiply that times 0.6, you'd get the miles. Like New Zealand is 7,000 miles from Los Angeles and about 11,000 miles from London. So it's out there in the middle of the South Pacific, and it's isolated, but really that's not what I would use to describe them. I would say they are independent and integrated. And that's because they have modern technology. They are not a third world country. They are ahead of a lot of countries and even the United States in some technology. Actually, they were the first to put in place the checkless money system. In other words, ATMs. They did away with checks long before we did it. We still use checks. They're in touch with a lot of different nations because of their trade. They trade with us in Europe and Australia and India and other parts. So they're in touch with a lot of different nations. They travel a lot. They travel when they graduate from high school. A lot of them do. They go on their adventure, they call it, their New Zealand adventure, and they travel to Australia for a while, and they go to the United States, and then they go to the UK. A lot of their family members have roots in the UK, England, Scotland, and then they come back to New Zealand. But even as adults, even when they're working, they take off time and travel the world. And they travel all over the world into the Asian countries. Because they are viewed as a very independent but neutral country, they can get into places where Americans couldn't get into. And the reason they travel is they have a curiosity about, well, what's it like out there? What are you people like? Why do you do things this way? They really are curious. They don't walk around thinking, well, New Zealand ways are always the best. They're curious about that. And so they have a global awareness. They know where countries are. They know something about those countries. They know about those leaders. They know about their sports. They know some of their history. And it's a world-mindedness. But they also have a connection to the Commonwealth countries of which they used to be a part. The old English Commonwealth, the old English empire of the past. And even though they're independent, they still have ties with England and Australia and South Africa and so forth. So they're independent, but they're very integrated. It is a magnificently beautiful country. It is a Western nation that is full of beauty, but it is also an integrated nation that takes in the beauties of other countries. But they have so much to offer of themselves. I mean, this is a country that is small and very compact, and yet in this compactness, They have, as you can see, beautiful mountains. They have incredibly beautiful lakes and rivers, and the weather is not so blustery in the wintertime or hot in the summertime. It's a tropical, semi-tropical nation. And so they can grow things all year round, and it stays beautiful. Lots of rain to keep it beautiful. And so you have these pristine beaches, and you have volcanoes, and you have mountains, and you have bubbling mud. You have thermal activity of all kinds. And it's all right there together. You have fjords like Milford Sound on the South Island that is world famous. It's pristine, and it's fresh, and it is magnificent. My wife used to say that every part of this country would be a national park in America, and it really is that beautiful. When I was doing the research for this, I found out by one person that he rates it the third most beautiful country in the world. Well, it's the most beautiful country I've ever been in, but I'm sure there's beauty in a lot of other countries. It's just all together right here in this country. So it is magnificent. Hope you get to go there just to experience that someday. But then there's another word I would use. I would use the word steward. These are the islands of the South Pacific above New Zealand here. You see them, perhaps you're familiar with them. They have connections to various nations like France or the United States or Australia, but New Zealand sees themselves as a protector also of those nations up there. I mean, those nations are vulnerable to natural disasters like typhoons. They also have coups every now and then, or they may have economic problems. And the New Zealanders, the New Zealand government looks out after those people and tries to help them through those difficulties. But the New Zealand people also see themselves as a bigger steward than that, particularly of their area. But they don't want their area of the world to be a dumping ground or an atomic test site. And so Greenpeace, which is a world organization, been around for a long time, is anti-nuclear. You know, they don't want bombs blowing up in their backyard. They look out after the climate. They would be very much about taking care of the environment. You may have seen Whale Wars on TV, a series where some New Zealanders and others tried to chase the Japanese out of the Antarctic from doing whaling and killing a lot of the whales. They are certainly opposed to any kind of pollution of the planet. And so they're squeaky clean. They're careful to reuse everything they can. They're very inventive to reuse things. And they're not going to throw away much. And they're not going to waste much. And they're not going to be ones to be throwing a lot of plastic into the oceans, as it were. So they're a steward. But also, they are very diverse. You can see a pie chart here. They're about 60% connected to the Europeans. That would especially be the UK. But these people are called Pakihas. That would be the Maori word for the European person of that background. But then there are the Maoris. That would be the indigenous Polynesian islander population that was there when the English came to settle it in the 1830s and 1840s, about 14% of the population. The other parts, there are two more, that would be the Polynesian islander population. You see a picture here in the middle. And Auckland is the largest Polynesian population city in the world. Those islanders have migrated to New Zealand, and particularly in Auckland, and it's the largest Polynesian population there. It's also has grown in the last 30 years in a lot of Asians. That has to do with the migration of Asian students to their schools and to their universities before they go back. Some go back, some stay and are involved in work there. And what I think diverse, but one is symbolized by this very traditional greeting among the Maoris. The Maoris call this the nose press or the Hongi. You don't kiss. It is a passing of your individuality to mine and mine to yours. And it unites us. And they look at themselves as less prejudicial and more accepting of perhaps any country in the world. And I'm not sure I could argue with that. They are very communal. This is Jacinda Ardern, their prime minister. She is the youngest world leader, I believe, still by age. And when COVID hit New Zealand, like it did everywhere, she took measures along with the government to basically lock it down. And here's the way the New Zealanders reacted. The community is more important. The overall health and well-being of the nation and community is more important than my rights. And we can see a contrast of that to what we experience here in the United States. And so that has an effect on how they look at things. And New Zealand was highly touted because of the way they handled the COVID. Of course, they're still vulnerable to it as well. Here's another word that I would use, humanistic. You know, Princeton the other day used the word secular. I'm going to use the word humanistic for New Zealand. There is a secular aspect to it, which has to do with we don't want religion affecting the government. And I had an email from Chris Miller this past week saying, pray for us because our government is becoming more secular. But overall, their culture is humanistic, which means they rely on scientific or rational ways of thinking. Religion is not a part of that. And but they're doing it, they believe, for the sake of human rights or the best way to treat human beings. You can see in this particular series of pictures that they have the same issues we do, morally speaking, but they don't argue with them basically over moral issues. They argue on other, is it good for human beings? Human beings should be able to do what they want to do if it's best for them. There's no moral base for that being stopped. Legal prostitution is one of them. And so that would be a part of their culture. I think you can see from those descriptions that they are unique and that they have uniquenesses that need to be approached in a certain way. So who must we be as missionaries? How must we approach this kind of country? And this is not the only country that's like this. Maybe you'll hear a lot of the same things when Jason speaks on Thursday about Canada. So who must we be? Well, first of all, we must be humble. We must be humble Americans if you're from America and you're going to go there. And that means to embrace their culture. I'm talking about the KIWI culture. I'm not talking about the church culture, first of all. I'm talking about KIWI culture. Become a KIWI fan. Become an All Blacks rugby fan, if you know what that is. Become those who cheer on the Olympians as they win medals. They won 17 in this past Olympics. You're happy about that. But you also are humble before the church people. You don't try to take over. You partner with them. You want to be co-workers with them. You're not the American Messiah that has arrived to start the work or to tell you how to do it. They have good ideas. They're working at it. They're very dedicated. They're not immature. In many ways, they're a lot more mature than I am. And so we are partners with them. We consider them co-workers, and that's what they appreciate. They've appreciated all the efforts that American churches and missionaries have made since about the 1950s. But they also don't want somebody coming in there and sort of, well, I've arrived and, I'll take over now. They know what they're doing to a large degree, and so let's partner with them. But I think we have to see overall that we go to the New Zealand work as sowers. We go as those who see the work from the long-term point of view. If we're seeing it as harvesters, we're going to be disappointed. We're in the planting stages. We're in the sowing stages. We're in the watering stages. And we're going to have to see it that way. We're going to have to look at it from the long-term point of view. And by the way, there are many nations in the world that are like this. Certainly not all nations are receptive. They are less receptive, and New Zealand is one of those. But they need the gospel too. They need missionaries too. Oh, and we also need patient supporters. We need churches that understand what kind of work this is, that it is a slower work, that we may not see the results of our labors for a long time. So we may have to plug away and plug away. We may have to be like John the Baptist and lay our heads down and not see the results of the harvest, which may be in the next generation. So we need compatible, patient supporters and churches that understand the long-term view, as well as we understand the long-term view as co-workers with the KIWIs. Well, let me just finish with this last part. There are many blessings from being a KIWI missionary. And I'd like to sort of broaden this out. I think it's part of being a missionary, period. When I think about the blessings, one I think is I made an impact. Our family made an impact. We've been gone 30 years, but we still have friends there. We still have coworkers there. And when we go back or when we're in touch, there is a respect for us, an appreciation for us that has lasted because we made an impact while we were there. I taught in a school which had students from all over the South Pacific and even into Asia, and we had a Canadian and an American. From that one spot on the map, we had that impact on the world, but we had an impact on the churches in New Zealand, and they appreciate that. We become a better world Christian when we live overseas. I mean, there's something I think that you can't see just living in the United States. You might appreciate a lot of cultures. There's something having lived there and viewing it through their eyes and being challenged by their ways of looking at things that you might not have seen before. And so my family and I, and this includes my children, even though they came back to the United States when they were still young, even into adulthood, they're world Christians. They know that they're KIWI Christian, that they're American Christian, that they're a world Christian. You appreciate every culture that way. And your family is eternally blessed. I mentioned my children, but I think about New Zealand every day. I don't know if they do. I know my son, when he went to university years after he came back from New Zealand, had New Zealand stuff all over his college dorm room. And he did in his office when he was working on his PhD at Yale. He still does some stuff in his house. He believes that that's a part of his life. And then we live with a lifelong godly burden. It is a burden to some degree, but it's a good burden that I remain one of the voices for this country of New Zealand. Probably nobody else in this room loves New Zealand like I do. And that's just the way it is, unless you go and live there. And then you will too. But other faculty members love the country that they live in, Brazil or Ecuador, or Nigeria, or Nicaragua, or Ukraine, and so on. And you become a voice for that country to people who need to support it or who need to go there. And that's good for us. I have KIWI blood running through my veins, and I wouldn't want it any other way. That'll live with me for the rest of my life. So I think you can tell that I have really no regrets for going overseas. I wish it were for longer. I was there 4 years. Should have been longer, but I had to come back to SIBI to teach here. But I don't have any regrets about that. Yeah, you say, well, did you miss parents? Did you miss grandparents? Did you miss events? Did you miss Dr. Pepper? Did you miss sports here? Some degree, but really it meant nothing in the long run of the experience and the impact on our lives and the lives of the people to whom we minister. And so let me close by just saying, I hope that you, in your lifetime, sometime in your lifetime, you have the opportunity and experience of living overseas as a worker for the Lord. And perhaps it should be New Zealand. God bless.